All right, we are now broadcasting to all of the attendees. I want to welcome everyone. My name is Craig Buffkin. I'm the managing partner at Buffkin Baker. We're a national routine search and leadership consulting firm. I want to thank everyone from around the country for joining us today, and want to thank our esteemed panelists as well. In fact, at this point, I would welcome Melissa, Zack, and Don, if you guys would just introduce yourselves and your firms.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Mounce. I'm a managing director at GTCR. We are a private equity firm in Chicago, about 100 employees, one office in Chicago. We've been here for 40 years, and we are investing out of our 12th fund at present, and have investments across financial services, telecom, technology, and also healthcare. My focus within the firm is with executive talent and human capital, and also diversity and inclusion.
Perfect.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zack Tillitski. I'm with Pamlico Capital. We're a PE group in Charlotte. We're about 30 employees, currently investing out of our Fund 4, which is about a $950 million fund. We focus on lower mid-market businesses. So for us, that means revenue in the $20 to $60 million range typically. We have three primary investment areas: business and technology services, communications, and healthcare. Probably about 70% of our portfolio consists of founder-led businesses, and similar percentages, we're the first-time institutional capital. My role, I'm an operations partner. I joined in 2016, and I'm a generalist, so I help across a wide range of value creation initiatives.
Great, thanks, Zack. Don Taylor, I work with a group called Pacific Lake Partners out of Boston. We are a search fund, work with folks coming out of the top business schools, help them find companies to buy. We support them in a minority situation and then support them through their role. We're investing out of our fifth fund at this point, and we have the fifth fund is about $300 million, so we're smaller than the other two panelists here as well. My job is an operating partner, and I help on the revenue generation side. So I go across our portfolio of 60 companies and help them figure out their sales model and how it interacts through the company, obviously to drive growth and valuation of the enterprises.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Today, we're going to be discussing really how private equity portfolio companies have been adjusting to the current pandemic environment, and really learn about some strategies from the panelists here of just about what's been effective in dealing with, I guess, what's becoming a new normal. And I'm going to ask each of the panelists some questions. At the end, we'll pick a few follow-up questions from the audience. And so as we are going through the seminar or webinar, please feel free to submit a few questions, and we'll make that happen at the end here. But wanted to start and really just ask the same question, allow each one of you to respond. But what strategies did your portfolio companies execute to initially adjust to the pandemic, and were there any specific learnings from that? Melissa?
Sure, I'll kick us off here. I think, and again, I am speaking from a human capital and leadership perspective, and so I think that's the great thing about our portfolio is about our panel here is we all have a little bit different focus within our portfolio companies. But, first and foremost, it was really around the remote technologies and and people being able to be productive in a remote environment. Mm-hmm. So that was, quickly addressed, and I think quickly solved for. And then we moved to managing stress and anxiety within the workforce. All of this was happening very, very quickly. And I think that came in a couple of forms. One, it was engagement. And so how do we make everybody feel secure and comfortable and productive and still able to get their work done and to engage with each other? I think secondly, we also saw a lot of changing regulations. So from a CHRO perspective, just to keep up and manage with the changing regulations, as some of our portfolio companies are operating globally, but also in multiple states. And so there was really a lot of focus in just what each state was allowing and how you needed to address that within your workforce. Thirdly, it was workforce safety. So where you had frontline workers still in your facilities, we had to quickly address all of those workplace safety concerns. And then I think an interesting one that came up very, very early on was the work-life balance, especially for parents. And so all of a sudden, schools were closed and your children were at home, and many parents became homeschool teachers as well. So there was a lot of things, very chaotic and a very, very different environment that everybody was operating in.
No, that makes sense. Zach, any thoughts?
Yeah, a couple things I'd touch on. The first thing for us was just focusing on scenario planning and liquidity. Of course, we had no idea how long this was going to take and what the severity was. And so, it was important to work with the portfolio companies just to help them think through, a range of potential outcomes, and then what they would need to do to prepare themselves, and then evaluate the cost structure to make sure that they could remain solvent. And so that was really the first step. And so that was a mix of modeling and evaluating the cost structure, and in some cases we did have to take cost actions there. And then we try to focus normal time just on portfolio interactions and some cross-portfolio events, and we really ramped that up because this was so novel and really nobody had the answer. We tried to facilitate just some sharing of experiences and collective wisdom, and so we've been running bi-weekly calls with several of our functional leaders, just so if nothing else they can commiserate, but also hopefully share things that have been working. And then we also had a bit of a centralized effort around some of the government programs. Those were coming out fast and furious, and all the information wasn't coming out at once, and so we didn't feel like it made sense for 20 different people to all try to come up to speed on their own, and maybe reach different conclusions. And so we spent some time and energy around that. Unfortunately, the way the programs were written, not many of our portfolio companies could benefit from the PPP program, and the ones that qualified for the exceptions, we ended up not taking the money. Just sort of the tone around that became sort of negative at the end. So unfortunately, that sort of wasted effort, but effort nonetheless. And then on the sales front, I mean, it's a good segue for Don, but we spent a lot of time in the early days just trying to evaluate the pipeline and figure out what was towards the bottom of the funnel and what might be able to close. And focus as much time and energy as we could there. And then in some cases, also evaluate, the product and the pricing, and see if there weren't things that we could do to make the product, more directly applicable to some of the issues, the customers were facing. And, if we could chunk it up and make it more affordable in some cases, try to overcome some of the friction and hurdles to buying. We just didn't feel like in that period of time, if people were willing to buy something, they probably weren't going to be willing to buy, some huge enterprise application. And so, just try to be creative and flexible where possible.
Good.
Great, thanks, Zach. With Pacific Lake, we're a little bit different. We have minority positions in virtually all of our companies, and so the PPP program was very important for us. And so we set in motion quickly a working group on that, and over 60 companies, almost 100% received PPP pretty early in the process. And we did then a coordinated effort to make sure that each person didn't have to go through their own learning. So we had one of our operating partners work specifically with our team on that. So that was important. Obviously, capital preservation was important, and capital support. A lot of our companies are pretty small, and so we have done some backstop work with them during this process as well, and want to be supportive of them as they go through their changes. We have a lot of very young CEOs, and so we spent a lot of time on. We did two webinars. One was on leadership during crisis. Melissa goes to the human capital side of life. They've not gone through this before, and so we spent a lot of time with some of our other operating partners in the human capital area. We also did one on customer retention, Zach, to go to where you went. So the customer retention was pretty clearly, let's ring fence our existing customers, and then let's work on the pipeline, right? Let's make sure we don't have the bucket leaking from the bottom, make sure we secure what's going on, finding out also from them why we're relevant during this time. So that was really interesting information for us to have, which we could then go to the pipeline and say, actually, during this crisis, you may not think this software, this service is important, but these people are using it this way to help stem the crisis, and this product set is working very effectively. So that first going to the customers gave us really good insight into how their product or service is being used during the time frame. So that was pretty important. And this kind of goes to the last part. What we find about this was we tried to go to each customer, each one of our portfolio companies, and find out where you're relevant during this time. And a lot of our companies were irrelevant, right? And so if you're banging on someone's door to get them to buy something, like if you're trying to sell to nurses in a hospital, something that's not mission critical to COVID, probably going to fall on deaf ears. So when you can't sell, be supportive and call them and say, we care about you, and when you come up for air, we'll help you. But also find niches and opportunities that do come up during those customer conversations, and then drive that through the model if you ultimately can help your customers. So those are the things that we found. Obviously did some specific work on webinars, but then also did some interesting work with existing customers and focusing on where they would potentially buy more, or if we're going to piss them off the least you possibly could by just saying we're here to help and not to bother you.
Not really trying to sell it right in the middle of the crisis, I guess, early on.
If you look at, I'm a sales guy, but if you're looked at as a salesperson rather than a solutions person during this time, the phone will not be answered when we come out of this thing. So
Won't be ringing. Well, that's probably a good segue to think through. Okay, and if we look at going forward, and given that you each three kind of have a different focus, human capital, operations, and revenue, what are some of the go forward strategies that you're finding effective as we come out of lockdown, as business begins, business activity and meetings begin to happen again, and customers are more open to actually having conversations?
Yeah, I think that there's been several. One that Zack had mentioned is bringing the functional leaders together. So that's been a large part of my role during this, during our shelter in place and ever evolving world, is bringing those CHROs together and doing best practice sharing. So that has been just a huge opportunity, networking and getting the best practices shared across the portfolio, because nobody really has any of the answers here. It's such uncharted territory that we're in. One of the things that has come out of that is employee engagement and pulse surveys. So I think, again, this has been such a human impacting issue. It's impacting everybody in different ways, and to really stay on top of the pulse of how your employees are feeling, whether or not it was at the beginning of how they're feeling that they're able to be productive, or now as we're looking at the phases that different states are going into to open and how that's going to impact the workplace. Taking a look at, what are all of those different situations that people are trying to navigate through? How comfortable are they returning to the workplace? What are the different functions that can be done very successfully in a remote environment? This has also been an opportunity for some of our companies. I know one was specifically looking to do a pilot this summer about remote working. And so I think we've had a global pilot about remote working.
Right.
and it's working. So I think that's the good news, is that people have found that, wow, we're not so different or, unique in the fact that we can't have successful telecommuting or remote workforce. So a lot of efforts right now that I think where the CHROs, other than putting in place the different protocols and phases to returning to the workplace, is really looking at what are the business opportunities now. So have we identified different functions within the company that can be done successfully remotely, and does that open up different talent pools now? So where we're not looking maybe geographically, we can look more broadly. How does that impact our office environments? So can we start to scale down square footage within our office environments? One of the surveys I know that one company sent out, really talked and asked if people would be comfortable working in more of a hoteling environment, where, they would be coming in, not 5 days a week, but, whatever, if they were near one of the organizations, the bricks and mortar, so that they could come in and, have a rotating office or workspace to work in. So taking some of those learnings from professional services organizations in that hoteling environment. And then also the technology demands and how we're configuring our workplace for technology. I know one of our companies had said, during the silver lining, I've asked everybody about what has been the silver lining in all of this, where's that positive opportunity? And somebody said, we're using Zoom more and more, and we're not reliant on, just the conference bridges. And that's actually increased more engagement for people who don't work side by side in the same office. So where there are multiple offices, that has really improved a lot of engagement. So I think that there's many different silver linings, but, this is a very personal, individual, and, workforce impacting time that we're in. And all of these things really need to be explored, and your employees are the best way to start learning about what's important to them and being able to figure out those solutions.
Oh, that's awesome. We've actually had a conversation with the CHRO last week, and this company, very, very large healthcare technology company, they're going from 156 offices. They eventually want to have about 53. So shedding over 100 offices in this process.
Yeah.
Just kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Thought process, but
exactly.
Zack,
all at once.
Zack, what are you? Yes, all at once. So.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe circle back to retention, which I know Don mentioned. I think we're trying to encourage our portfolio companies, not to be reactionary. Don't wait for your customer to call you saying they're canceling or they've got issues. You really need to look at the data that you have and make sure you understand, are people still engaged with your product? Are they still logging in? You should probably stack rank your existing customers based on the likely impact that COVID's having on their business, and just be really thoughtful about, understanding and identifying where the risk is in your existing customer base. And then in some cases, you may have to be creative, in order to retain a customer. And so whether that's, giving, better terms, in exchange for a longer extension or something else. don't just sort of go into it with, one policy. I think you have to listen, to what people need from you as a business partner and try to be flexible, to retain, good customers. So I think that's a great call out by Don. M&A, we're still doing, tuck-in acquisitions and actively looking, across the portfolio there. So that, that remains, a big part of our strategy for growth. On go-to-market, maybe one thing I would add is, and this is certainly not my idea, but came up a lot in our cross-functional calls, was using the time to return to the basics. I think a lot of managers, any function really, but definitely in sales, when the market is hot, it's hard, right? It's hard to take the time to reinforce training and the behaviors that you want with the team and getting the messaging right and, your Salesforce data right and everything else. And so, we had several of our sales leaders kind of take a step back when, the pipeline slowed a little bit and said, okay, these are the things that I would have done had we had a bunch of time. Let's put that in, and so we can hit the ground running, when people are willing to listen to us again. And so, I thought that was really smart on their part. I mentioned the peer-to-peer collaboration, but in some cases, like we have 4 different live event businesses, which have been obviously hit very hard. And so, we're just trying to put those CEOs and leaders together just to talk about what does this mean for their business model, how you might pivot it, what are they seeing, what technologies are they trying as they shift to virtual events, et cetera. And so again, just trying to look for common challenges across the portfolio so that people can, benefit from what other people are trying and get up that learning curve a little bit faster. And the last thing I'd say is, I've tried not to over-engineer things and in many cases just stay out of the way. People are really busy and working really hard. And I cannot say enough how impressed I've been with how people have reacted to this, how much agility and flexibility they've shown, the leadership they've shown with their teams. And so in a lot of cases, I haven't had to really do very much, other than, let them do their jobs and when they, raise their hand for help, try to bring those resources to bear. But I've just been really impressed with how people have responded to this.
That's great. Thanks, Zach. Similar themes, Ringfence Customers. Obviously, we've all talked about that. Obviously, job number 1 in this process, if we can think about things to garner from this. Focus on late-stage pipelines. I talked about the first time. Critical to do. Make sure you don't lose those people. You may close them, you may slide them, but you don't want to lose them, right? So you have 3 options, and the last one is the worst one. And so the slide is what we've tried to do is at least people push it out 30, 60, 90 days so you don't lose that prospect totally. And then the planning piece, which Zach talked about, our companies have spent a ton of time in that process. A lot of them are early stage companies with new CEOs, and they're looking at their ICP, ideal customer profile, looking at their sales process. They're working internally to do demos together so we can see how we're doing to get the more replicable sales process. And that's been really good time spent. So we've had time to kind of recalibrate that process. These companies are all growing at pretty high rates. And so having a little time out to do this has been terrific for them. And then stakeholder maps, something we spent a lot of time with, changes a little bit too at this point. If your stakeholders change during this process, make sure we're mapping out good conversations by the stakeholder maps that we're building. And then on some very tactical stuff, conversations about, okay, our outside salespeople now are inside salespeople because they can't meet anybody. So our world of Zoom land is taking over. How effective can we be doing that? Because a 2-hour meeting, no one can sit in a seat for 2 hours. That's why we're a 45-minute webinar today, because people just can't do it. And so you have, even in complex areas, you have to do things much more efficiently and quickly, maybe over more Zoom calls rather than one elongated one with a bunch of people on it. So those tactics on how to get people engaged, and then even more tactically, I'm working with a group that has that's selling into benefit managers, and they can't get people to turn their Zoom screens on for a sales call. So it's this salesperson and then 3 blank screens. And so what are the protocols to get people to do that? So just we're propagating people, prompting people to say we'd really like this to be a video call. If not, then let's just make it a conference call, because it's obviously off-putting a little bit to if you're talking to a blank screen, that's hard, and if you can't see the reactions of the people on the other side. And so, but I think that's been an interesting process because the SDR folks are really used to creating really good opportunities and conversations with people. Not in person, and we can get and use their tools to help the salespeople at least begin the conversations. And I think also during Zoom calls, which we're trying to be very efficient, is we have to have 5 minutes of market softening, of getting to know one another, because a lot of times we're just doing things really efficiently, and you don't build any rapport with folks. You may build industry rapport and industry knowledge, but you don't build personal rapport, and that matters a lot, and it's harder to do in this format. But those things matter as well. So I think we're looking at all of those pieces, as we think about how we get better over time. And obviously there'll be a lot less sales travel, I think, going forward, because we've been pretty efficient with this process. So getting better at that and practicing and seeing what works is going to be critical.
That's good. And one of the reasons we created the webinar with 3 different perspectives, and that's just great insights. 2 questions have popped up. One, the first being, what have you learned about your CEOs? What have been the cracks in the armor, and then what have been the silver linings, Melissa, as you've kind of talked about a bit? Any common themes there? Obviously not specifics. So.
I've been really, I think some of the things that I've really seen the CEOs rise to the challenge, and the CHROs, the partnership there. I think many times, right, the HR function is trying to find their seat at the table. And I've said, wow, if they don't find their seat now, right, not sure they ever will. Because this is a fantastic opportunity for the CHROs to really be leading from the front, and that partnership with the CEOs. So I'm seeing that combination, and how just, many of the companies, as they have different virtual events, that CEO is popping on for the first, 5 or 10 minutes. And just answering any questions and interacting and, doing the Zoom happy hours and, really just integrating and being a good resource there. I think the communication plans as well, many of our CEOs have been very, very intentional. And this has come up as a concern of just what is the one source of truth, because we were in so much chaos early on that, getting a strong communication plan and really honing that communication plan and disseminating it in a very different way was very, very important. It's interesting because the couple of surprises that I've seen is how, some companies or some of the CEOs were not believers that many of the functions could be done remotely. And again, that has been something that, necessity, right, has dictated that we have to, that we had to work remotely and effectively and keep business operations as seamless as possible. And so that's where, I found that some really, some truth has come out of, wow, I really didn't think that this was going to work. And I'm really surprised that it did. So even with some of those pilots or some of the thinking that the organization was doing, it, makes me wonder, how, just how much, how behind those efforts or initiatives the CEO and the leadership teams were, and how that may have not been successful under different circumstances. But now, again, from necessity of the situation, we've proven that to, we've debunked a lot of those myths.
That's awesome. Zach or Don, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'll reiterate, I've been really impressed just with the leadership the CEOs have shown, and some of the creativity, to adjust to what's happening, to find, ways to keep the business moving. I think we had, one point I knew the exact number, but it was over half of our portfolio companies either had a RIF or a furlough or some sort of temporary salary reductions around this, and I think that's probably was the biggest challenge, maybe for obvious reasons, but especially if it's something that a company has never gone through before, is trying to lead through that, maintain the culture of the company, and really kind of help people understand why it's necessary. I think that was probably the biggest challenge certain of our CEOs had, if they didn't have any experience with that. But overall, I just think the group has acted pretty incredibly.
So just a couple of things to support that. The leadership by these younger CEOs at the Pacific Lake portfolio has been astounding. And people have stepped up in different ways. But I think it's been also interesting that they've leaned into the support that Pacific Lake and to their collaborating partners within the other portfolio CEOs. So through the webinars and other conversations, we've had really good, you're not alone in this process. There's a lot of people going through the same thing. And so that's been very helpful because they've been feeding off one another through that process. And more importantly, being a 62-year-old, their technological savviness is extraordinary. So the work from home thing did not faze them one bit, and they just marshaled the forces to do it. And so that was astounding to me that we've gone through this process with seemingly seamless. Melissa, as you talked about, functions can be moved out, people can be in remote places. If you are focused and really work on an effort of communication, it can be done very effectively. And these folks have done a really good job with that. So I think I'm proud as punch about our CEOs, leaning in, leadership. They probably never had this stress before, and then also using technology in a new way and being very open to it, and then helping their company get through that process as well.
Oh, that's great. We have two more questions that have come up, and both are, I think this one's probably a little pretty specific, but anybody that would like to react to it, it says, how do you anticipate dealing with the return of furloughed employees that may have been earning more under a stimulus plan, or employees in states with other types of employment programs, such as the shared work program in New York? And so any thoughts there? Because there's been a lot of folks have been furloughed or are now finding themselves unemployed. So.
Yeah, this has been something that our forum, our functional forum had discussed, and it was more in the light of just as they're trying to hire and more from a talent acquisition, that before the, kind of the war for talent, right, that we've been through because of low unemployment was more at the skilled managerial levels, and just, trying to get our arms around those talent pools. Now this direct labor, it's been difficult. The talent pools have dwindled in some cases because, the stimulus plans have afforded a good pay package without them returning to work. So that is something that, was highlighted, discussed. I can't say that we had any great ideas or solutions for that, because I think it is just something that's, that is well-intentioned, but has some unintended consequences to it.
Yeah, it's not really a huge area of expertise for me, but at least what I've heard is, I think our HR leaders have tried to be delicate about it as they've gone out to the group of furloughed employees and asked them to come back. In that, I think if you refuse, I think it's technically, it means that you're resigning, at which point you're no longer eligible for unemployment. And so I think we're trying to explain that to people and explain the legality of it. I think in some cases, let's say you're only inviting you know, 3 out of 10 furloughed employees to come back. If someone says, hey, I'm really not ready and here's my situation, maybe you go further down the list and pull somebody else back, and there's some leniency there. But anyway, I think it's sort of touchy legally whether or not someone can really opt to do that. But again, I could be wrong, so don't take my advice.
I support the last two speakers. I think it's, I was just actually talking to a guy last night who is reopening a restaurant that he owns up in New Hampshire, and it's been really hard for him to get people back, really hard. And so, you know, for a lot of the reasons we just, the two other folks just talked about, whether we can have that conversation fruitfully about losing your benefits if you don't accept it back, you know, that's a hard conversation to have. But one that has to be had, and I think people are, the population who may be getting unemployment may not know that, and so if we're the ones who are arbitrating or bringing that conversation in, we have to be very delicate about it. So, but I think spring loading lower level employees to come back, lower cost employees coming back is going to be hard.
A lot to deal with there. The second question that's come up, or third actually, have you discovered that you're missing any key roles in leadership? Any need for new titles or roles that have evolved in the portfolio companies?
So one is, and I think this has been on the rise even pre-COVID, but maybe some more urgency around it, are the cybersecurity roles. So, with, having more transactions and business dealings, right, in a remote world, that has really been a focus. So where, sometimes that is handled by the, chief IT, officer. But, I do think that cybersecurity is definitely sometimes a different skill set, a different focus, and needs that independence to ensure that the IT suite is capable and very secure for the organization. So that's been something that has come up for us.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't really think of any examples. In some cases, we've maybe realized the opposite, is that, sometimes a simpler, flatter organization, works as well, if not better. And sometimes growing companies will try to maybe over specialize too fast. But I can't think of, I agree with the cyber point, that's something we're certainly trying to lean into. I can't think of really missing roles broadly across the portfolio.
To me, it's human capital management. I think going to Melissa's area, we have small companies don't have HR heads as they are their process people rather than strategists. And obviously there has been a lot of complexity with moving people out, job roles, laying people off. There's just been a lot of strategic conversations that having a good human capital management executive. And so we're contemplating, adding that to the Pacific Lake operating partner team, that capability, because a lot of our companies won't be able to have that, that super either head sales role or, human capital management. And so we're adding those to, or thinking about adding those to our operating partner portfolio to be able to do that across the board as a strategic partnership. So
good. Before I ask the last question, I was just curious if there was anything that the three of you wanted to ask each other or comment on or bring back up that we've talked about.
good topics.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really good discussion. Well, my last question was just curious. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes here. Would love to know what your favorite activity has been during quarantine.
Mine has been my Peloton and planting and growing a garden. So that's something that I seem never to have time to either initiate or to maintain. And so I put it right outside of my office window in the sunniest spot of our yard, so I can literally watch it grow. So it's that's been fun, but definitely my Peloton has been my refuge and what I do for my mental health.
Love it.
I guess for me, I've been reading more. I'm a bit of a sports junkie, and so without any live sports to watch, I've had to find other things to do my evening. So have been reading more, so that's been good. And I'm not the gardener, but my wife is, and so I've enjoyed. It's just a beautiful spring here in Charlotte, and so just enjoyed spending some time, outside. We have quite the collection of birds and rabbits and chipmunks, and I was like, who knew? We had so much wildlife in our backyard. But when you're here all the time, you start to notice those things.
I love it.
So I think we've been very fortunate. We have very nice places to work out of our homes, and so my wife has an office, and I have an office, other opposite ends of the house. So that's been great to work, closely with her in that. But we walk every day, which has been great, and sometimes twice a day when we were in Nashville. And I also did a lot of walking meetings in the park in Nashville. Craig knows Warner Parks, and I'd meet up with mentors or mentees at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, walk for a couple hours, and have probably the best and thorough conversations that you can have with incredible transparency, and it's probably a great way to interview candidates as well. Melissa, I don't know if you agree with that, but it's really interesting. People just chill and speak their mind, and it's been terrific. So I've enjoyed that a lot during this time.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, my favorite has been power washing. I think I've power washed everything that's moved around our house. Didn't realize how bad things have gotten. So, but all good. Well, I want to thank the three of you immensely for taking 45 minutes out of your day to share. I thought some just incredible insights to what's going on, and really, greatly appreciate your time.
Thank you,
Craig. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. You have a great week, rest of the week.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Let me get the fourth one.